Now, you wrote about the violence we are seeing in the US from elements of the left who you argue have a history of celebrating or excusing those guilty of these acts of political violence. And on that, we've also had President Trump designating Antifa as a terrorist organisation. I know you wrote about that also for the New York Post. Do you think Antifa deserve to be labelled terrorists? And please just expand on what you're talking about as far as elements of the left having a very permissive attitude to violence.
Well, I would play it any other way around, that if there was a group, whether organized at a normal structural level or a sort of slightly more amorphous blob of entities across the country, if there was such a movement that came from the political right, which, for instance, had spent years smashing up federal buildings and privately owned businesses, which has spent years firing guns on the streets, attacking police officers, attacking journalists, and hospitalizing, almost killing journalists who look into their activities. I think that this thing would have been shut down years ago. And Antifa has been allowed to run because too many people have taken it at its word that it is an anti-fascist organization. It isn't. It's a fascist organization. You can tell literally from the way they behave. They dress up in black, they mask their faces, and they beat their opponents to a pulp on the ground in American cities. I think that there's a question as to whether or not Donald Trump, in America you could designate them a terrorist organization. But the one thing you can absolutely do is use the powers of the state to arrest people who are routinely breaking the law and making life unlivable in the American cities which they dominate in, places like Portland, places in recent years like Seattle and parts of California and elsewhere. It's a very big challenge, but it's one that I think the Trump administration should rise itself to the moment on. As for the wider pool, Rita, it's just very striking to me. And as I said in that City Journal piece, again, you've just got to play it the other way around. There are people who engage in political violence from all sides. But I think it would be surprising if somebody, for instance, involved in terrorism, right-wing terrorism, would find themselves lauded on American campuses and given berths and speaking appointments and much more. And I mentioned there in passing Angela Davis and her own history of radicalism. And she was just honored by Cambridge University in England with an honorary degree. And this is somebody with a putrid record in activism, a disgusting record in activism, and no distinction in academic thought. But she gets honored. Same things with people like Layla Khalid, the PFLP hijacker. These people that the left has unfortunately particularly venerated are people who've been venerated not in spite of having a history of violence and connections with violence, but as if that frisson of violence is part of the thrill, part of the reason to promote them. And I think that just as I would expect the right to have a look at itself if it was marinating in those waters, so I think the left really should, and again, especially after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, really should look at what it has been encouraging on its own side. And it should remember that instead of thinking that it's always the good guy, let's at least concede that violence can come from all sides. But if it comes from your side, you have a disproportionate necessity to condemn it and to make sure that the gray zone of violence isn't one that our societies are allowed to exist in, but that we have a hard no. The hard no against political assassination, whoever is the target. A hard no against the pursuit of violence in politics, whatever the aim that's being pursued. If we could do that, left and right could show a degree of hygiene on their own sides, then some good can come out of these terrible circumstances.
Douglas Murray, thank you for your time.